After 2 games of the World Championship match between Viswanathan Anand, the challenger, and Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, Carlsen was leading with that convincing victory in Game 2. It was going to be interesting to see how Anand reacted to this loss. Of course, last year he kind of went into his shell, played rather passively, and really played without self-confidence. So today, Anand had the white pieces. Game 3, it started off with d4 and a queen's gambit, and Carlsen declined that. Bishop f4 variation. White has this typical space advantage with this nice pawn chain, so everything absolutely normal so far. And Carlsen played bishop a6. Excellent idea, exchanging off this poor bishop on c8. So this is all very familiar. Typical strategy. And now if Anand wanted to play very safely, he could simply castle here. Very solid position. You could say that white has a slight space advantage. But interestingly, Anand pushed on with b5. Now this is an extremely sharp variation. Has been seen before. After c6, the knight cannot retreat because of c7 picking up a piece. Queen c8 is absolutely forced. So the players were playing very quickly at this point. Of course, that knight can't really be taken because there's a pin on the c-file, so white pushes on. So white now has this far advanced passed pawn supported by the bishop. So black needs counterplay. b4. Everything very standard so far. Players playing very quickly. a4 from Carlsen. He was starting to slow up here. a4 is a good move. You have to try and get rid of this knight on b5. Rook c1, supporting the pawn on c7. Now this looks very dangerous for black, but it's all been seen before and things seem okay. Knight g5, again, I mean this move looks absolutely outlandish. In fact, Anand played it very quickly because this has been seen before. Basically, if this knight is taken, let's say, well, like this, and then you take again, then knight d6 is a winning move. The queen has to move away, and then white gets a new queen. So Carlsen played correctly. Knight to f6, supporting the knight. He only played that move after a half an hour think, and now that was the first indication that perhaps Carlsen wasn't as familiar with this variation as he might have been. Anand was playing relatively quickly. He took and played f3. So if the knight is driven away, then again white comes into d6, and this is very embarrassing for black. Therefore, rook a5 to attack the knight. Now this has all been seen before in the game between Levon Aronian and Michael Adams, two very strong grandmasters, and in that game Aronian defended the knight, and well, the game reeled on like this, but basically Adams was okay here and managed to play his way to a draw. Instead, Anand in this game took the knight on e4. So this is the first new move of the game, and well, Anand was playing this very quickly. Clearly he was familiar with this position. These next few moves are just about forced. So Anand is still supporting very well this pawn on c7, but now Carlsen gets counterplay with his own passed pawn. Now Anand played a good move here. He took on d5. Carlsen would like to keep his rook behind that pawn. Instead, well, he would like to play pawn takes pawn. The problem is with this, that this pawn is isolated and vulnerable. So it's actually rather dubious. So therefore, instead, Carlsen took with the rook on d5, and now queen takes b6. The problem with this position is that the rook cannot easily get back to supporting this passed pawn. So basically, Carlsen's passed pawn on a3, although protected by the bishop, is far less dangerous than this passed pawn with the rook behind it. Anand revealed after the game that he had already had this position on his analysis board, whereas Carlsen, well, he was struggling quite clearly. Queen d7 played by Carlsen in order to bring his rook into the game. Anand castled. And rook c8. Rook c6 from Anand. I like this move very much. This kind of dominates black's queen and in some variations prepares to just add strength to the rook on the c-file. Carlsen was really struggling here. He's using up a lot of time, and it's very, very difficult for black to get serious counterplay here. For example, if, well, let's say h6, this is an idea that Adams used in that game against Aronian to exchange off this bishop. But here, it's too slow. Queen comes to a6. Behind this passed pawn, you can see that the rooks protect the pawn on c7, and the queen just picks up the pawn on a3. White is winning that position. So Carlsen chose g5, lashed out. Very risky move, but he had an interesting idea in mind. Now this pawn is slightly weaker. He played bishop b4. Now this looks very wobbly, very wobbly. But if this is taken, then the rook is taken on c6. But you can see, basically he wants to get his bishop into d2. So for example, if rook c1, then bishop d2 hitting pawn and rook, and that's nasty. Rook b1 is also not completely clear after this move, bishop d2. After thinking for almost 15 minutes, Anand came up with an excellent idea. He played rook to a1, basically making sure there was no nonsense with the a pawn. It's a really exact move, excellent move. And here again, it's very hard for Carlsen to find counterplay. And running short of time, he didn't find really the best defense. I mean, maybe you could sit there with h6, but white, little by little, can improve his position. I mean, this is a horrible position for black to play. Carlsen played bishop a5. The queen nudged to the side. And now Carlsen took on c7. This is a losing move. Now it's very tricky. For example, if Anand plays queen b7, just putting pressure on the bishop and pinning, then rook d4. This is, I think, what Carlsen was hoping for on a good day. With counterplay, if pawn takes, then queen takes, check. But Anand, well, he's excellent in these kind of positions. It's complicated, but he's in control and he calculates extremely well. Queen c4, excellent move. Pinning. So if bishop takes bishop, then rook c8, check, wins the rook, and that's the end of the game. Carlsen is completely lost here. Basically, he's losing his bishop. He tried e5, but this was all in vain. This was taken by Anand very quickly, kept the pressure on. Carlsen gave up his rook for the bishop and protected the pawn on a3, but this was all in vain. Now he's still suffering because there's still this horrible pin, and now e6 starts to break through to black's king. Carlsen shuffled across with the king, and now rook c1, forced resignation. Look at the power on the c-file. The bishop is just lost. The bishop's going to have to move away, and then rook takes rook, end of the game. Carlsen resigned here. Shocking victory. I think we saw Anand's strength in this game. Really deep preparation. Clearly Carlsen wasn't as familiar with this variation as Anand. So deep preparation, and in a relatively complicated position, excellent calculation to force a win. Well, obviously afterwards, Anand very pleased. He looked very relieved and delighted. Carlsen, well, didn't look too happy with himself. He said, "Everything went wrong from the start. I didn't have any chances. That sucks." There we go. So after 3 games, the match is now even, and they play the 4th game tomorrow, Wednesday. Do join me for the report then.